Welcome to everyone. My name is Brandon Knight. I'm director of Rhetorica Christiana Forum here at William Carey University, and I'm here with two great guests and colleagues, one of which is actually going to be helping moderate the debate next week. But what we'd like to do just in the next few moments is to kind of set up what is going on in culture for this conversation to even be needed. And so next week, April 23rd, Thursday, 5:30 to 7:30, you can get it on live stream via YouTube, or it will actually be live here at William Carey University on the third floor of Tatum Court. And so before we go any further, again, my name is Brandon Knight. I'm Associate Professor of Strategic Communication. You may be able to tell that. You may not be, the more I mess up. But of course, two great friends here, and delighted that they are here to have a conversation. And so I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Troy?
My name is Troy Gibson. I'm a professor of political science, and I'll be moderating the debate with our two guests, and write, teach, and research in the area of religion and politics in general.
My name is Zach Williams. I serve as coordinator of graduate recruitment, enrollment, and retention here at Carey, so full-time staff. And then I'm also adjunct instructor with our Cooper School of Christian Studies here, so I teach a little bit as well. My background is in church history, so very interested in these kind of questions that we're going to be addressing with this forum, and looking forward to our discussion.
And so before we get down to some of the specifics as to why this topic is needed, I think it's important to kind of meet indirectly, if you will, our two presenters. And so we have Dr. John Wilsey from Southern Seminary, historian, recently had two publications, God and Country and Religious Liberty, a Conservative Primer. And then you have Dr. James Wood, who's at Redeemer University in Ontario, Presbyterian background. And so I know you have some familiarity with Dr. Wood. And so just tell us a little bit about his background. And then I know you have some with Dr. Wilsey. And so we'll meet them indirectly in that way.
Yeah. Dr. Wood is well known in the area of political theology, particularly Reformed political theology. He has written and published many works, appeared on many podcasts, given many lectures, taught many classes. He's at an institution that's known for that kind of emphasis area. And I came across his work, found him to be someone who is very aware of what are considered to be the failings of liberalism in the Western world. He's been tracking with that for some time, and has kind of represents the response to that. Sometimes it's referred to as religious postliberalism from a conservative Christian reform perspective. If liberalism were to fail, what would take its place in America? And he thinks that it is failing, and that an answer to the chaos that will supposedly ensue when it does is found in the Protestant Reformed tradition, going back especially to the magisterial reformers.
Dr. Wilsey?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. John Wilsey as both a friend, mentor, a professor, even as a pastor for a couple of years. And so, dear brother, I first encountered Dr. Wilsey first year of my PhD program at Southern Seminary. Actually, the first time I met Dr. Wilsey in person was the day before my entrance exams into the PhD program. So met him the night before, and then, had him grill me in entrance exams for the PhD program. But a brother I hold in utmost respect and really love him to death. Just a lot of fun to be around. But yeah, a lot of his research is focused on American civil religion. He's well published in that field, and so he's written books, numerous journal articles. When I first met him at Southern Seminary, he was doing a year-long fellowship at Princeton University. And so he's someone who's well respected in the field of American religious history. His most recent book, which kind of defends and advocates for a classic conservative understanding of religious freedom and how it relates to kind of the conservative tradition, I think is immensely helpful. He's helped me a lot in thinking about the relationship between faith and history, which is one thing I really appreciate about him. His most recent book, God and Country, really focuses on that. Would highly recommend that book. But in the context of our debate, he will be defending really kind of the classic American political tradition and the religious roots of that, and arguing that it's worth fighting for and preserving.
Conserving.
And so looking forward to hearing his thoughts on that. Looking forward to hearing from Dr. Wood as well. I've read a lot of his work and really benefited from it. So I think both of these brothers are going to have really good perspective to bring us.
And so we've invited both, of course, to have this debate, and nothing like a good clash of ideas and some drama. But that's not to say that they wouldn't also agree on a great deal of information, because they're both Christians, various denominational backgrounds. But what would you say some of their common ground points that we need to know before the debate?
I mean, I say this with some trepidation, just because we want to hear from them. I don't want to speak for them, but my understanding is, even apart from the basic Orthodox Protestant theological consensus that they share as evangelical Protestants, though one's Baptist and one's Presbyterian, they actually share a lot of common ground on political theology. There are quite a number of approaches to political theology, and they would both, for example, reject a theonomic view. Neither of them would say that, to use Niebuhr's terminology, that Christianity is conducted through politics. They would believe in a basic separation of the church and state. They would accept the view that there are two kingdoms of God, a spiritual and an earthly kingdom, that the mission of the church is spiritual in nature. That's why we've been very careful to select as the debate topic the one area which would be really a minority of areas where they would disagree, and that's simply whether the state, the government, has a positive role to play in promoting true religion. Much of the liberal tradition, for example, James Wood would also be appreciative of, and he would consider himself a conservative too. I think one of the differences is he would say, well, part of what you need to conserve is the roots that gave rise to the liberal tradition in the first place, the roots that gave rise to religious liberty in the first place, and that is a thoroughly Christian, especially Protestant, worldview. They would both reject the establishmentarian principle, or at least where the church, the state is asked to select one particular denomination and set that up. So a lot of things you're going to find that they're not nearly as far apart as a debate format might suggest.
Well, so just to help our audience better understand why this debate on this topic now in the 21st century, should the state promote Christianity, or as the proper resolution is the duty of the civil magistrate to promote true religion, that is the religion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so why are we having this conversation on this topic now, considering you would think that from a Protestant standpoint we've answered this question? And I'll let either one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're living in a day and age where, I don't know that it's necessarily something that like your rank and file church member sitting in the pew is thinking about often, but at least voices that are online seem to be very vocal about these issues, especially the last 5 or 6 years or so. I think you have what many have seen to be what I've heard described as the failure of evangelicalism to properly promote Christianity in society. They see they rightly see that there's a lot of things in our society that are very concerning, and a lot of ideology that's very concerning, and we'll recognize that, or we'll say that, clearly something is the way that Christians have sought to engage culture. There's been something lacking in it, and I think that's a fair observation. Now, many will go on to blame that on evangelicalism, a more evangelical approach, and the way that evangelicals have understood the relationship between church and state. And so, it's one thing to observe; it's another thing to blame evangelicals for that. So all that to say is I think there has been an increasing awareness and an increasing conversation around these things. I think the way that our culture has trended has kind of sparked that to some extent.
Yeah, and much of the setting up of formulating this resolution with Dr. Gibson, who helped immensely with that, is Patrick Deneen's work on postliberalism. And so if you want to add to that.
So why is this discussion? I mean, first of all, it's a good question to ask about because there are those who would say, don't feed this. It's a non-issue. Rank and file Christians. All this, even the discussion of it.
Don't platform bad ideas.
Yeah, platform bad ideas or ideas. But in defense of it, the survey researchers have noticed among all Americans that something just seems off, that there is a collapse of a consensus. Some people call that the post-war consensus or a shared worldview or something like that. I think I heard Kevin DeYoung refer to it as public truth. That there is either a collapse of a shared public truth or the replacement of a shared public truth with a new public truth antithetical to the old one. And some people talk about that as the Judeo-Christian worldview or what have you. So something feels off to a lot of Americans. It seems like we are more divided on the fundamentals than we've ever been, or maybe even for the first time. And so that has sparked a conversation or a search for a way to respond to that. Is it just that one group has lost its status and cultural hegemonic status in society? Maybe, but there seems to be something off, and it's not even just on the right. Also on the left, there is a post-liberal sentiment being expressed there. There should be a new morality, not a neutral morality that liberalism espouses that we ought to impose, and that has caused a reaction on the right. Okay, well, we have to have this conversation because radicals on the left or progressives on the left, they are post-liberal. So now it's just a fight for who's going to achieve the new consensus. We better be part of this conversation because they're not going to stop at liberalism. They have moved beyond it too. So if they're going to replace liberalism with their own worldview, we better be in that conversation. That explains part of the rise of the so-called Christian nationalist movement, at least among intellectuals.
So you would say then that the past few years prior to the recent Trump reelection, like critical theory, that all of that is an attempt of some ideology trying to fill the vacuum.
Yeah, there's a vacuum, and there's a reaction to essentially many on the left found liberalism inadequate to the goal of equality, and so there's a desire to replace it with some different moral vision, and not just fall back on neutrality when it comes to morality, religion, free speech. We need to reorient America towards a egalitarian goal rather than simply a liberty goal.
and you have some figures, and names are escaping me right now, but even this new movement of Christian nationalists for those that own that term, and then others that are very close to it. And I don't know if Wood actually would take that moniker or not, but the woke right.
Yep.
And so there is a connection there, and so we felt like maybe we were out of the weeds of what went on in recent years, but really this other side has been kind of growing in the midst of all that.
Yeah, I'd just add on that. That's another important reason to have this conversation, is to show that discussions about the role of Christianity, even approaches that see it as having a central role in shaping the culture, should be distinguished from, versions of so-called Christian nationalism that are really nationalism enlisting the moniker of Christianity in its defense, which I would describe more as a European right-wing approach of doing it. And so, you're going to find, James Wood's a good example of that. No one wants to be identified with an ethno-nationalist, ethno-Christian view of society. But those people do exist.
Oh, yeah.
And so if we're not talking about them, you're gonna run the risk of suffering from the errors of ambiguity, where you lump them all together when they're clearly distinct.
Yeah, so the difference of tradition versus traditionalism. Traditionalism, well, we're in this is the way we do things, separation of church and state, but never actually understanding why. Well, tradition is realizing these debates have been going on and horrors of the past, and there's a reason why we came from that. And I've gotten that even with this being our first point counterpoint forum, that we shouldn't platform these ideas. Well, we learn better from hearing the other side so that we can defend against those ideas. And also, you also gain respect for the other side in realizing there's reasons to hold that view. And so maybe we can kind of transition into that very briefly. But so what are some of the good reasons that someone would position themselves with siding with Dr. James Wood, for example, that there should be more overlap? And then we'll go to Wilsey from the Baptist standpoint. What do you guys think?
Well, you want me to take Wood? Dr. Wood comes from a tradition that's really not that old, and is also very much rooted in the Protestant tradition, also rooted in the medieval Catholic tradition, which is that a society it should be directed. The institutions that God creates, whether it's the church, the family, or the state, they are directed towards the ultimate good. They should be directed towards the ultimate good. Dr. Wood would share the same view with Wilsey, that you can't force faith upon anyone. That's a personal thing. But you can place people. You can arrange a society that puts people in the path of faith. Just as a parent is going to take their child to a church, they know that's not going to automatically instill work faith in their heart, but they are leading the child to make faith plausible, to make faith natural, to make belief and trust in God a normal part, to make the morality to make godliness seem like second nature. Those things, Dr. Wood would argue, are part of a godly government. It, like the church, like the state, is directed towards orienting citizens toward the ultimate good, while distinguishing those institutions and their unique godly callings, purposes, methods. They're all very different. But they have in common an ultimate goal, which is to glorify God.
Yeah. In his recent in defense of cultural Christianity and First Things, it's like, sure, it can't force belief, but definitely makes it more possible,
Right.
and maybe even more probable. So
Right.
it's like making the pathway straight.
Yeah.
if
I
you
mean,
will.
what's the normal way that most people become Christians? They have parents who are Christians. So what's the normal way that most citizens have become Christians? They have a society that puts them in a path towards Christianity.
And
it's the norm.
Yeah, and historically,
That's true.
that wasn't.
Right.
I mean, even 50 years ago, we had some cultural aspects like that. Okay, and so from the Baptist perspective, Wilsey's perspective, what do you think he's going to argue in this case?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't want to misrepresent Dr. Wilsey, and he's a lot smarter than I am. So I won't claim to speak on behalf of him by any means.
Just all Baptists.
Yeah, I definitely don't claim to speak on behalf of all Baptists. My background is specifically in Baptist history and Baptist thought, and so but still, but it's vast.
We won't do
There's
that.
so many different arguments, so I'm probably going to butcher any attempt to kind of represent it as a whole.
Well, what would be your argument?
But I mean, I think Baptists, for the large part, throughout their history, have, they certainly, I don't think, would contest the idea that it's good for Christianity to influence society. So it's not as if I think Baptists can often be caricatured as having no concern for how, Christianity, religion, it's a private thing. It's really not concerned with, anything outside of the
Public
individual. I think I think Baptists have been caricatured in that way, and that's not how Baptists have thought about things. I mean, they have been those who've recognized that Christianity and personal faith certainly have implications for how we think about engaging culture and those matters. And it's not as if they have argued either that government should be, thinking about the relationship between church and state, that government should be indifferent to the matter of religion. I think that's another area that can be, kind of caricatured and misrepresented. But the Baptists have made a very clear distinction between not only the church and state having different roles, but also operating in different spheres of authority. So they'll make arguments such as, the government doesn't. Not only is it not their God-given role to try to make disciples, essentially. But they're also not given the authority to do that. They're not given the authority to be Lord over the conscience in that sense. And so you have had something of a separation between, the role of the church, the role of the state, and then their authority as well. And so, so again, it's not as if Baptists are not concerned with Christianity's greater impact on society, because I think that's a large part Baptists have been throughout their history. But their distinct understanding of the church and how they understand the relationship of the church and the kingdom of God to kingdoms of this world, I think has kind of given them a distinct approach to how we understand the relationship between church and state. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it definitely does. But I have another question. But we see in the midst of the chaos and, what Deneen would say, the death of liberalism, or failing of liberalism, many Baptists have seemed to take a liking to the Christian nationalist perspective. And not all Baptists, of course, but you would just suspect that. How do you hold those two in tension?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a challenging question because it depends on what Christian nationalism are you talking about.
Right.
If you're talking about something like a vision that has been put forward by somebody like Stephen Wolfe, for example, in his case, in his book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, where he's arguing that we should essentially have a Christian prince who is, over
That's interesting.
the government. It's that kind of vision of Christian nationalism is, I would argue, I'm not speaking on behalf of Dr. Wilsey or the Baptist tradition. I would argue that it's incompatible with the Baptist understanding of the church and the kingdom. And what is ironic to me about Baptists who like the idea of what something like a Stephen Wolfe is putting forward is that historically, when you've had those kinds of arrangements, it's often the Baptists who were the first to suffer because of it. Even in like early colonial America, in Massachusetts Bay Colony, you had Baptists such as Obadiah Holmes, who were persecuted for their Baptist faith, and so it's one. I would argue that it's at least that kind of vision of Christian nationalism, where you have a very essentially an established government is actively promoting one form of religion
Sectarian
over another. Well, you've got to decide. And Stephen Wolfe will argue that basically, the vision of Christianity that the state should promote would essentially be something, that's within the Nicene Creed, but nothing more specific than that. Well, that might work for a time, but eventually arrangements like that, I think, will tend to promote one form of Christianity over another.
That's interesting because, first off, it's so dangerous talking about what we think Wood would say and what Wilsey would say. My suspicion is that Wood would distance himself, and I think has from Stephen Wolfe, as most who support some version of the Christian Commonwealth idea have, because of at least the perception of a kind of an emphasis on ethnocentric views. But it's interesting to me, both Wood and Wilsey would almost certainly agree with the following basic conservative syllogism about what the framers were thinking when they fashioned the Constitution, the Declaration, the founding. They would have all agreed with the basic idea that our entire experiment in self-government, where we are entrusted to make appropriate, good, wise decisions about how to raise our family, about how to worship, about what jobs to take, about who to vote for. Our entire experiment in self-government, where we're going to maximize the highest degree of freedom possible, all that's predicated on a highly virtuous people. Without virtue, freedom will turn into license and self-destruct. And we won't be virtuous without religion. I think that Wilsey and Wood would completely agree on that. What they're going to probably disagree to some degree is on, okay, so religion is a public good. Is it a public good that the state has a role in promoting? Or is the experiment that the framers more or less came up with, which was the best way to preserve, conserve, promote, to encourage religion, is an entirely hands-off approach.
Neutrality.
Just let it compete with each other, and you're going to have this flourishing of religious piety, which will produce the virtue necessary for freedom. What Deneen and what Wood, I think, are going to argue is that experiment has failed. It was probably doomed to begin with, and we're going to have to find a way to modify it, because it only works if there's a shared worldview to begin with. Because the framers thought, look, we don't have to establish a particular church. Everybody's basically Christian in some way anyway. But that's no longer the case.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I very much appreciate you both being here. Dr. Gibson, we'll see you again next week moderating the debate, and we look forward to having Drs. Wood and Wilsey here. Zach, of course, it was a pleasure. You spoke for the entire bet. I'm just kidding. Just a lot of ideas, and of course, we're all excited about next week. But we hope that you can join us if you're here in Hattiesburg or in the surrounding area. You can come to campus. The event is free. The debate will start at 5:30 and be in Tatum Court on the 3rd floor. If you're not in this area, you can watch on YouTube via live stream. Thank you.